Can we start? Yeah, it's live now. Okay, welcome everyone to our session on gender issues as the part of the 16th annual conference of Economic Research Forum. My name is Murat Tasdemir, Professor of Economics in Istanbul Medeniyet University, Turkey. I'm gonna be moderating this session. We have three papers to be presented today. First, I'd like to give you some information about the session. First of all, it will be recorded and will be available at the YouTube channel of ERF, and at the same time, it will be broadcasted live in YouTube channel again. Each paper, each presenter have 15 minutes of presentation time, and then we go on with discussion comments and Q&A session. All the participants can ask their questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And in the Q&A session, you can also raise your hand and ask your questions as well. We're gonna, all the papers and presentations and bios of the presenters are going to be available on the website of ERF. So we're going to start with the first paper. Suzanna Khalifa, PhD candidate in economics at Aix-Marseille University, Aix-Marseille School of Economics in France. And the title of the presentation is The Price of Silence, Marriage Transfers and Women's Attitude Toward Intimate Partner Violence. Okay. Now I'm gonna give the floor to Suzanna. Hi, Suzanna.
Hi, thank you, Murat.
Yeah. So you can start your presentation. You have 15 minutes.
Okay, I will start by sharing my my presentation. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, we see it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Murat, and thank you for all to be here and all people involved in the organization of this session. So today I'm going to present my paper that Murat introduced, The Price of Silence, Marriage Payments and Women's Attitude Toward Intimate Partner Violence. So this work is part of my thesis dissertation. So I'm very looking forward to your comment and suggestion about this work. So what I'm doing in that paper, I'm exploring the impact of marriage payment on women's attitude toward IPV using Jordanian data. So I'm looking at more specifically the impact of the dower, the prompt dower, which is a payment that the husband to be pay to the future wife at the moment of the marriage. So we call it mahr in Arabic. And so in that presentation, I'm going to shortly show you my estimation strategy and the IV that I'm using to control for potential endogeneity. And the result that I'm going to discuss with you is that we can observe that a higher value of the prompt dower increase likelihood of women justifying IPV.
Suzanna,
so, Yes.
Your presentation is cropped. Can you make it full screen? So
oh, it's not
just
full
cut
screen
from,
yet.
yeah, we can't. We see just part of the title.
Ah, okay. Let me check again. Sorry. How can I do that? Okay.
Yeah, this is better, but still, not, yeah, that's
So
great.
Okay,
This
now
is
you
perfect
can.
now. Yes.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you, Murat. I'm sorry. Okay, so I was going to show you some context and motivation to this problematic. So basically, violence against women in Middle East is estimated to be about 37%. Among them, 60% remain silent, and violence against women takes several forms, such as sexual harassment, forced marriages, female genital cutting, honor killing. And so why focusing on attitude is really important is because when we ask people why they think that IPV is still prevalent, they always tend to refer to some persistent of gender norms and stereotypes, and also justifying IPV in a context where women do not prevail to the expected behavior. So this question takes place in literature that is pluridisciplinary, and sociological study already start to think about the role of cultural practice on IPV, and so you have theories that suggest that that some cultural that culture in general and cultural practice do interact with individual preference, and so can explain part of violence against women in society. And economic literature also try to show that cultural institutions do impact women beliefs about IPV. And so just to go back to this idea of paradox behind the door. So in Palestine in early 19th, you have a feminist campaign that start questioning this idea of a mahr giving to women a form of independence because they receive a certain value when they get married. So they have kind of access to property and ownership, but at the same time, it has been experienced as an exchange for women's sexual availability and obedience, and a form of barrier to divorce. So I'm gonna be a little bit more precise on this aspect. So the idea behind this barrier to divorce is that if we look at condition behind the rule, which is the divorce initiated by women, they have to give back what they received at the moment of the marriage. So this is kind of two critiques that have been made in the literature. And so how can we express that in terms of economic literature? Basically, the existing literature on economic resources and domestic violence do not lead to consensus. So basically, bargaining theory is gonna predict that women having access to more economic resources are gonna have a better bargaining power, and so they going to face less domestic violence. But at the same time, male backlash theory suggests that in some traditional cultures, men can feel threatened and challenged in their traditional gender role if women have access to property. But that doesn't tell us how the door can affect violence accepted or justified by women. So if we think about it, we can derive some explanation from women outside option and what is called the credibility of the trade point. So this idea is that if we take a look in how bargaining happen between spouse, what is going to define woman participation constraint is the utility she can have if she want a divorce, right? And so a first way the door can affect woman attitude toward IPV is by reducing the credibility of her having access to divorce and so leave this union. A second way we can think about this is more related to this literature about gender identity and backlash. So what is the idea behind is that each individual have in his utility a sense of belonging to a particular group, such as a gender or being, for example, a wife. And a way the dower can affect this is by giving women a stronger identity as a wife, and so increasing the cost of deviating from this identity and the prescribed behavior behind this. And so to estimate this effect, I'm going to, as I say, use Jordanian data. So I'm using the Jordanian labor market survey of 2016, and I'm exploiting the woman's answer to the question: does the husband have the right to hit his wife if she burns food, waste money, neglect children, refuses sex, argue with him, or talk to another man? So first, I'm going to construct a binary variable taking the value 1 if she say yes at least once, and then I'm gonna construct it more as a count variable, counting the number of times she say yes. I'm also going to explore the question: what is the value of the mahr that you received at the moment of the marriage that I deflated by consumer price index? And so to have a quick idea on the magnitude of this payment, it represents almost 7 months of a household income. And so this is my empirical strategy. I'm going to first estimate a probit, so the probability that my binary variable take the value 1 on my prompt dower, and some basic covariates such as spouse age at marriage, number of alive daughter, sons, their children, and the level of their parents' education and the level of their wealth. I'm going to add fixed effect at the governorate level and a rurality, and cluster my standard error at the years of marriage and governorate level. So because we might think that there is a threat that is coming from, for example, some may think that a kind of reverse causality is going on, because a husband that is more likely to want a more traditional woman that is more likely, for example, to be less, to be more tolerant vis-a-vis to domestic violence, is probably more likely to pay a higher dower at the moment of the marriage, and so that can definitely introduce a bias in my estimation. So to overcome this issue, I'm going to use an IV, and so the instrument that I'm going to use is based on the fact that literature refer to availability of cash as a determinant of the prompt dower that is going to be paid at the moment of the marriage, and indirectly against the deferred part. So the first part is what we call a mu'akhar, and it's a part that the husband is going to promise to pay later in some less liquid assets sometime. And so to do that, I'm going to rely on the fact that real international oil prices already have been shown to be an exogenous variation of cash inflows from Gulf countries in Jordan. And so I'm going to use only short-term variation to avoid any omitted common trend between the evolution of oil prices and some determinant of gender norms and economic development in my data set. And so I run some falsification tests to make sure that my instrument is not going to affect the matching quality. So basically the idea is that I don't want that my instrument is going to make one potential husband more having a higher, for example, bargaining power at the marriage market, and so more likely to have a better spouse quality, because this is going definitely to influence, have an impact on women's attitude toward IPV. So to make sure that this is not what is going on, I'm showing that there is no correlation between my instrument and indicator of matching quality, such as spouse age difference, spouse education difference, both age and education squared, and wages difference. I'm also doing the same. I don't want that my instrument is going to affect, for example, marriage timing, because people are forecasting, for example, a better period, so they're going to postpone the marriage, and that's also can affect women's attitude toward IPV. So I'm doing the same exercise and showing that there is no correlation between the instrument and indicator of marriage timing, such as spouse age at marriage and the engagement duration. For the same reason, I'm checking that my instrument do not affect migration and so the sex ratio, because this is going to affect my marriage market. And so I also add a bunch of very extensive additional control, both at the individual and the local level at the moment of the marriage and the moment of the survey, but maybe we can discuss that later because I don't have that much time. And I really want to show you, so this is my baseline results. So we can see that both my first and second stage are very strong and robust to the inclusion of all the covariates, additional covariates. And so my main effect is that we can see here an increase of 1,000 Jordanian dinar on the prompt dollar, increase a little bit more than 8 percentage points woman likelihood to say at least once that she agreed with the husband beating his wife. And so to go a little bit in detail about transmission channel, I don't know if I have time. Murat, can you tell me?
Yes, you have time.
Okay.
You can go like 3-4 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. So about transmission channel, if you remember, I said that there is this idea of divorce rate, so that woman is maybe having difficulty to repay back something if she receives a high value, and so that's going to affect the fact that she cannot divorce, or at least not have a credible treat of divorce. And so to see if that is maybe what is going on, I'm doing some heterogeneity on my results among women that have better access, for example, to the labor market. And so we can think that they probably have a better option to repay back what they receive at the moment of the marriage. And so we see that women having a better access to, among women having a better access to the labor market, this effect of the prompt hour on IPV is no longer housing. I do the same for women declaring having saving, and so when I estimate this in structural form, I don't find a robust effect for women saying that they have saving. And so another thing that I wanted to show you is that this effect of the prompt hour on women attitude toward IPV is really focused on attitude toward IPV and is not representative of a general impact on other aspects of gender, such as woman opinion on some general statements about women's status. So I estimate the effect of the prompt hour on women response to some general statements such as boys and girls should receive the same schooling, women should have a high position in the society, and I don't find effects, or at least robust effect. I do the same. I estimate the impact of the prompt hour on women declaring having to ask permission if she want to go outside, and I don't find effect. And I do the same for women declaring being afraid or not of disagreeing with the husband or a brother, and I don't find effect. So that really suggests that the prompt hour really impacts something particular to this idea of bargaining between spouse and identity as herself as a wife, and not some general statements about society. I also looked at if this effect is more driven by some particular context in which women declare that she is okay with IPV. And so I distinguish situation. So first case is more related to interpersonal situation with her husband, and other cases are more related to domestic tasks, such as cooking, neglected children, and waste money. And so we can see that my main effect was clearly driven by women's response to situations that are more related to her position as a wife with her husband, and not just as a household keeper. So this is the same exercise, but instead of a binary, I used a count variable, counting the number of times. So basically, that means that an increase in 2,000 Jordanian dinar is going to cause a woman declaring being okay with IPV in one more context. I did some additional robustness checks, so very quickly to see if my results are sensitive to reporting error bias. I used first value declared by husband instead of woman. In a second exercise, I exclude non-Jordanian women to avoid a woman declaring having received a value in another currency. And I also exploit information in the 2010 survey for women married, so before 2010, to control that there is no difference between value declared in 2010 and 2016. I also extend my temporal restriction on my sample to include older marriage, and my results are all very robust. And I did some robustness on the way I construct my instrument. So if you remember, I said that I kept only all short-term variation using a decomposition that is called the Hodrick-Prescott filter. And so I redone that by using alternative smoothing parameters. Sorry. I also include in some additional specification my long-term trend to be sure that my identification was really holding on my short-term. And so I also did a bunch of specification using other estimator. And so to conclude very quickly, so in that paper, the main idea was to highlight the effect of the prompt door on women attitude toward IPV in Jordan. The main result was that 1,000 Jordanian dinar increased women in the mean prompt door increased the probability of women justifying violence by 8 percentage points. And in terms of policy implication, the idea maybe is to think about the impact of cultural customs on such as marriage payment on legitimate harmful beliefs, instead of only focusing on individual characteristics. So thank you all for your attention, and really looking forward to discuss with you.
Thank you, Suzanna. Thank you. Great presentation. Now I'm gonna make one or two points, and we take questions from the participants, and all participants can ask questions through Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, or they can raise their hands and ask their questions. So it was a very nice paper, and I especially like all the robustness checks, etc. I would like to see it in this paper if this effect of dowries, if there is the difference between religions. Does the bride price custom exist in non-Muslim Jordanians? I don't know. If so, how does non-Muslims differ in this respect? I was curious about this one. I didn't see that in the paper and your presentation about other religions in the same country, in Jordan. And my second point is gonna be, in any case, any bride price, even if her family keeps, acts as a pressure mechanism into right to stay in the union in this setup, I think. So that was just my point. That was not a question, actually. Is there any data about non-Muslims in your data sets?
No, unfortunately, to answer to the first question, it would be great to see differences between religions, but the questionnaire do not include a question about people's religion, so I don't have this information.
Yeah, it was okay. Thanks. It's very nice to see how these traditional institutions affect intimate partner violence.
Thank you.
So this mechanism. Okay, we have. We have one question. By the way, can you see the questions through Q&A? Questions. Can you see or? Okay, we have one question from Nur Mograbi. She says, does the research consider working versus non-working women? Obviously.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, I can see the question. So this is what I did in my heterogeneity. So I checked if my effect was different between women have ever worked in their life or not. I also do the same I did the same for women actually working or not. And so results are every time the same thing. When women have access to the labor market or is actually working, this effect is no longer significant. So the effect of my prompt door on IPV attitude is no longer significant.
Okay, thank you. We have one question from Raghu Asad. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah. Yes, you can.
Hi. Yes. Thank you, Suzanna, for a really lovely, excellent paper, very carefully done with very convincing evidence. My question is about kind of trying to tease out the differences between the local average treatment effect and the average treatment effect. Because your instrument concerns primarily people who have migrated. And so I can suspect that the set of compliers is a very specific set within the Jordanian population and does not generalize. Did you do a comparison between the OLS results and the IV results to see how much, what's the difference in effects you get from that? And also, did you do a test of the endogeneity of the Dower variable to see whether we need the IV results? I mean, I think that, both of these things would tell us a little bit about whether the local average treatment effect is different from the average treatment effect. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. Actually, this is something that I was working on very recently. So yeah, my OLS is very lower than my IV result, and so I think that I can maybe improve my identification because, as you say, maybe not all the population is concerned by this impact of oil price, but I think that is not that much people that migrate, but more people that have in their family or in their people that may send remittance, and so maybe that is not that concerning, but I'm actually working on a way to exploit some heterogeneity on remittance or something like this to better improve this aspect of my my identification.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Raghu Asad.
I don't know if that answers to the question. I cannot hear.
Yeah, because he's muted now.
Ah, okay. Well,
all right. I'm checking if there is any other questions. Anyone wants to ask questions? You can ask questions in person as well. All right. So I think that's all. Thank you, Suzanna.
thank you, Murat.
Now we go on with our next presentation. Serife, Genç, Ileri from...
sorry, I should stop sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, you should stop that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Serife, Genç, Ileri from Ibn Haldun University, Istanbul, Turkey. Her presentation is titled Gender Wage Gap and International Trade Evidence from Turkey. Okay, Serife, floor is yours.
Yeah.
You can go on. You have 15 minutes. You know already. All right.
Yeah, so I think you can hear me. I unmuted myself. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks so much for the opportunity. So as Murat announced, the title of our paper is Gender Wage Gap and International Trade, Evidence from Turkey. So this is a very preliminary draft, and so all questions and comments are welcome as always. So, okay, let's see. So this is like a roadmap of my presentation. I will first start with a brief introduction, then I will state the objectives of our study. Then I will briefly touch upon the theories between gender wage gap and international trade. Then I will talk about the data and methodology, and then I will conclude. So, well, of course, gender wage is a very popular topic, and we all know what it is. But let me briefly explain what I mean by gender wage gap. It's the difference between the median earnings of women relative to that of men. And so the global gender wage gap is around 16% according to ILO estimates in 2018. Why are we concerned with gender wage gap? Because as stated by many studies in literature and Wei et al. In 2013, reducing gender inequality can lead to better socioeconomic conditions in the country, in all countries. And so it's been estimated by Wadon and Delabreyer that closing the gender wage gap could bring as much as $160 trillion to the global economy. So this is a huge number. So what we are trying to do in the study is we are trying to first investigate the gender wage gap present in Turkey. Then we'll also examine the relationship between gender wage gap and international trade. And so by doing this, we are in fact filling the gap in the literature by being the first to study the relationship between trade and gender wage gap in Turkey. Okay, so let's look at some theories about gender wage gap and international trade. So there's a theory by Becker, Becker's theory of discrimination. And according to this theory, when gender discriminating firms face higher competitiveness through international trade, so it becomes costlier on them to pay the higher male wages. So they may be willing to hire the cheaper female workers. So international trade can increase the gender wage gap. According to the second theory, the international trade can increase the gender wage gap. And this is stated by a study by Böhler et al. In 2018. So firms, according to Böhler et al., firms that become exporting firms, they will demand higher flexibility and more commitment from their workers. as they are now working for longer hours and across time zones. So since the men are seen to be the more flexible workers, they may prefer to pay less wages to women who are seen, as I said, as the unflexible workers. So these are the two different sides of the story, the link between gender wage gap and international trade. So what we do in the study is we use data from the Structure of Earnings Survey, which is conducted by a Turkish Statistical Institute in years 2006, 2010, and 2014. So this data is an individual level data, but it also includes firm level characteristics such as the sector code, the firm size, and some individual level characteristics, which I will explain. So, of course, we reduced our sample, we restricted our sample to full-time and permanent workers who are aged between 15 and 65. And we also, because of the possibility of underreporting of wages, we included only the workers who earn at least the minimum wage. So we are left with 425, around 426,000 observations. The full data covers about, for the 3 years total, more than 600,000 observations. Yeah. So this is in fact some descriptive statistics of the sample. Well, 76% of the employees in our data set are males and 24% are female workers. So we group industries as tradable and non-tradable, and by tradable I mean the manufacturing sector, and the non-tradable are the services and like sectors such as construction and mining. So when we look at the tradable and non-tradable division, we see that in the non-tradable sector, the average wages are higher, and workers have higher average educational attainment than the tradable sector. And male workers in the tradable sector, they are earning more than the females. When we look at the non-tradable, we see that this situation is reversed, where in our sample, the females in the non-tradable sector seem to be earning higher than the males in our sample. But when we look at attributes like education and the occupation of the females, we see that females are in the non-tradable sector, they are more educated, highly educated. And in the next slide, which I will show, okay, let me show it in fact. We see that the females are more gathered in occupations like professionals, not managers, but professionals. So they seem to be like on the higher steps of the job ladder, the women in the non-tradable sector. So I will touch upon some more interesting things about our sample. Well, union coverage seems to be higher among male workers and also in the tradable sector. So male workers with administrative responsibility look slightly higher in both the tradable and non-tradable sector. But as I said, when we look at the distribution across different occupation types, we see that the women in our sample are at higher levels of the job ladder. Okay, so what we do is to examine the gender wage gap in the data. We use the Blinder-Oaxaca twofold decomposition, and we decompose the gender wage gap into two components. Well, these two components are the one which can be explained by group differences in predictors, and the unexplained part, which is usually attributed to discrimination. So the predictors that we use are as follows. So we have two types of predictors. We have individual level and firm level characteristics. The individual level characteristics that we use are the age, the tenure of the individual. We have a dummy for gender. We have 4 education dummies. And we have 9 occupation dummies for 9 different occupation groups. We have union coverage dummy and administrative responsibilities dummy. So these are all included in the questionnaire. And the firm level characteristics, we have size dummies. We have industry dummies for the firms that the surveyed individuals work in. So we also included year dummies since we use data from 3 different years. So first we start with the composition of the wage gap for the whole sample. We don't distinguish between tradable and non-tradable at the beginning. So in our sample, which covers both the tradable and non-tradable sectors, we found the raw wage gap to be about 6.5%. So it seemed like in the whole sample, in our sample, females are working, earning more than males, but this is due to the non-tradable sector, as you will see. So the explained part of this difference is about 7.7%. So this means, or this implies that if we use the predictors of the model, then the women should be earning, in fact, 7.7% more than men. But this is not the case. So the unexplained part is about 1.2%. So this is, in fact, the part that we attribute to discrimination. Okay, so if discrimination weren't there, I mean, the unexplained part weren't there, in fact, the females in our sample should have been earning 7.7% more than males in our sample. So we do a detailed decomposition and we look at each predictor and how much they contribute to the explained part. I mean, it makes more sense to comment on the explained part. So when we look at the explained part and how each predictor contributes to this, we see that about 65% of the explained part of the wage gap between males and females is due to the combined effect of occupation dummies. So here, and also the education seems to contribute constitute a bulk of the difference between male and female earnings, the education dummies. This education here is the combined effect of all the education dummies in the decomposition. So this is something we expected because I told earlier that females, especially in the non-tradable sector, they are more highly educated than men in our sample. And the 1.2% is the unexplained part, which we attribute to discrimination. So when we repeat the same analysis for the tradable and non-tradable sectors separately, in fact, we get some interesting results. In the tradable sector, which, as I said, covers the manufacturing industries, the male wages are found to be 9.8% higher than female wages, the raw wage gap. So the explained part is 4.8%, and the 5% is the unexplained part, which again we attribute to the discrimination between females and males. So when we look at the decomposition, in the explained part, tenure and age seems to be accounting for about 95% of the explained parts of the wage gap. Also, the industry dummies together accounts for a big bulk of the explained parts. But again, like half of the total wage gap is the unexplained part. And so for the non-tradable sector, when we do the same decomposition, we find that females are in fact earning about 6.7% higher than males in the non-tradable sector. So the explained part accounts for like 10%. So if, like I said before, for the whole sample, if the there were not any like unexplained parts, sorry, if we just took into account the impact of the predictors, in fact, the females should have been earning 10% more than the males in the sample, or reversely, we can state that you know, males should have been earning 10% less than the females, but this is not the case. So females are earning 6.7% more than the males in our sample. So the remaining 3.5% is the unexplained part, which we attribute to discrimination. So when we compare the unexplained parts in the tradable and non-tradable sector, we see that in the tradable sector, this unexplained part was about 5%, as you will remember. But it's lower in the non-tradable sector, which shows in a way that taking these results as a benchmark, so it tells us that in the non-tradable sector, there's less discrimination against women. So again, looking at the decomposition results for the variables, we find that here education accounts for close to 80% of the unexplained part, explained part of the wage gap. It's an important contributor, and also the occupation dummies. Okay, so this, in fact, conjecture we had before when we looked at the data, because I told you that the women in the non-tradable sector are highly educated, and they also are more highly concentrated in higher ladders of the job ladder. So these two, in fact, account for an important part of the explained part of the wage gap between men and women. So how much time do I have left? I think I have a few more minutes, right?
Yes, 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay. I'll just wrap up in like 2 minutes. So in fact, our result is similar to what was found by Böhler et al. And Menon and Rogers in 2009. So what Böhler et al. Found was a positive relationship between trade and the gender wage gap discrimination against women. And this is due to, as I said before, working across large time zones increases the demand for male workers because they are seen more flexible than women. So female wages are suppressed because they are seen as the more inefficient workers by the exporting firms. And Menon and Rogers explains the increase in the gender wage gap due to international trade, due to a skill-biased technological change. Okay, so what may be the reasons for Turkey? We thought a little bit about it. We didn't do any further analysis, but possible explanations, again, working across large time zones, or maybe cultural values and ideas on female roles can be a reason for the gender wage gap. Also another, sorry, I will go back to the previous slide. Another Böhler and et al. Also suggest that in an environment of tough competition, only the most profitable firms survive. So they are also the firms who are also most able to discriminate, as stated by Böhler et al. So maybe, you know, some kind of analysis of firm profitability and the gender wage gap can be, you know, an explanation or something further to dig. But for the case of Turkey, we just did an analysis about Turkey's top exporting destinations. And we found that there is not too much difference in the time zones. So the time zone explanation doesn't seem to fit our case of Turkey. So maybe we should concentrate more on either the cultural values on female roles, or maybe the other theory stated by Böhler et al., which says that you know, more firms which are earning more profits are the ones that discriminate more. But for that, in order to do a analysis looking into that, we need some firm level data, which also includes worker characteristics that we leave for future research. So to conclude, we find the gender wage gap due to discrimination in our overall sample to be 1.2%. And we measure the discrimination against women to be higher in the tradable sectors, where the male wages are higher than female wages by 5% due to unexplained reasons. And in the non-tradable sector, we find the unexplained component of the wage gap to account for about 3.5% of the wage difference between men and women. Yeah, so I mean, our policy suggestions would be to promote a culture of salary transparency, social support for working mothers, as well as subsidies for those companies that accommodate working mothers. But of course, we should also always be careful about these policy suggestions, because sometimes these policies may backfire. So yeah, so this is all I can say at this point. And thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Serife. It was, I think, a valuable contribution to the literature on the gender gap in Turkey. I have one question. Did I miss that part about union being under collective bargaining effect? Did you include it in the tables?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So in my notes, I noticed that despite the fact that collective bargaining increases wages on average, being under collective bargaining reduce female wages in your Blinder and Oaxaca decompositions, right? Is that correct? Or
for the overall?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So for the overall sample, so this is the yeah. So I mean, it contributes positively, but very small. Yeah. So it seems like being under collective pay, like under union coverage, seems to be working against women, but it's like a very small, you know, negligible amount.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see if participants have any questions. We have one question from Raghu Asad. I guess he'd like to ask.
Is the public sector included? No, it's not included. The public sector is not included. No, the public sector is not included. It's not.
Okay. Any other question? Let's see if anyone raises hands. No. Okay. We thank Serife for the nice presentation and go on with the next presentation, Amira El-Shal from Cairo University, right? And her presentation is titled as Explaining Firm-Level Gender Productivity Differential in Africa. Serife, can you stop the screen share, please? Amira.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, let me share the
You
screen.
can go on.
Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, is it clear now?
Yes, we see your presentation now.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Murat, for the presentation, and I'm glad to be among you here today, and hopefully next year we'll be able to meet face to face. My paper is trying to explain the firm level gender gaps, gender productivity gaps in Africa. As you are aware that we started by what motivated our study, or I will start by what motivated our study. We went through some very worrying figures on the total factor productivity by gender of the manager across regions. So here in the first graph, the blue bars are those for male managed firms, and the red bars are those for female managed firms. And we are covering the 6 world regions. And you will find here that the gender gaps in total factor productivity are the widest in Africa. You can find it here, where in the rest of the regions, the productivity gaps are not as wide. Also, we try to probe deeper into firms across African regions in the second figure, and we checked the total factor productivity by the gender of manager in each of the African regions. And to our surprise, we found that there is significant heterogeneity in the gender total factor productivity gaps across African subregions, and especially the gap, as you can see here, it's prevalent in the region of North Africa as well as the region of East Africa. So it seems that the firms in these 2 particular regions are driving the wide total factor productivity by the gender of the manager across the continent. So these are the figures that initially triggered our study, and we also checked the firms for which we have like panel survey waves in the enterprise survey data to try to see if the gaps are are they widening or are they narrowing, to see what are we facing exactly. And we found that the gender total factor productivity gap is actually evolving and actually widening in some of the African countries, such as Cote d'Ivoire. We have 2 waves for 2019 and 2016. The same applies for Ethiopia, etc. So here we are trying just to give you an overall view of the status of the gap, and whether it is like widening or narrowing. These were actually even more worrying figures that triggered our study. And as you are all aware, from the economic perspective, the gender total factor productivity gap will hamper the continent's realization of its full economic growth and job creation potentials, perpetuating tremendous efficiency and welfare losses. And to me, more importantly, are the development implications, because in the literature it is well established that women reinvest up to 90% of their income in the education, health, and nutrition of their family and community, compared to up to 40% for men. So we are not addressing here an economic issue or an economic challenge, but rather this challenge or this productivity gap will have massive development implications in the whole continent, especially the regions of North Africa and East Africa, where the gap is prevalent. So after giving you an overall view of what motivated our study, we we will go and see the empirical evidence. What do we know so far and what we don't know? We found that while surveying the literature, we found that very few studies report on the gender differential in firm level total factor productivity in developing countries. And to our surprise, that the evidence provided is even mixed. Most of the studies tend to focus on one or more of the dimensions. One study focus on innovation, other studies focus on like institutional barriers, access to finance. They just focus on very few dimensions of the gap. So this was one of the things that worried us. Also, we found that the evidence is even more limited on the causal pathways underlying the gender productivity gap. So we are trying to probe deeper and to see, okay, if it's well established that there is a gender productivity gap in some of the countries of the continent. Are these gaps driven by behavioral differences for women? Are women, for example, more risk averse? More women are like more risk takers, or is the gap observed driven by differences in talents, perspectives between women managers and male managers, or a third dimension that we are trying to see if the barriers that arise, if the barriers that we are like facing, women managers are facing are more severe than the institutional barriers that male managers are facing. So the literature, the relevant literature just focuses on one dimension, and the evidence is mixed, and this like provided us with a stronger motivation to initiate this study. The objectives of this study are three. First, we will test for the presence of gender differences in total factor productivity in Africa, focusing on North and East Africa. And second, and this is the most important part or the most important contribution of this study, is that we are trying to identify the association pathways where gender productivity gaps are observed, focusing on multiple dimensions, not just one or two dimensions. And the third objective of the study is to try to investigate the possibility of heterogeneity of firms' behavior at different points of the productivity distribution. With respect to the data, we relied on the World Bank Enterprise Survey because they provide us with the data set for African firms. The sample size for covering all Africa, 7,000 firms in 46 African countries. More than 6,000 firms are observed in North Africa, in 4 countries in North Africa, and more than 8,000 firms in 10 countries are observed in East Africa. We tried also to cover a large or like a long time span. So the available data we have is for the period from 2006 to 2018, and the firms observed are operating in both the manufacturing and services sectors. So this is simplification of the analytical framework this study relies on. We have a set of total factor productivity determinants, which we will discuss shortly. And these determinants, along with the firm characteristics and the sector characteristics, can interact with the gender of the manager and have implications on the total factor productivity performance of female managed versus male managed firms. And like for this part of the analytical framework, the total factor productivity determinants, we try to rely on or draw from the macroeconomic literature on the determinants, and we try to use all the available variables or available indicators in the enterprise survey to try to construct 5 broad categories of total factor productivity determinants. The first category is the innovation one, where we have data on the use of foreign technology, the use of email, website ownership. More importantly, we have data on the product innovations, process innovations, and R&D spending of firms. So this is like the first broad category of total factor productivity productivity determinants. The second category based on the literature is the human capital one. We have data on the educational attainment of the labor force, the manager's experience, the training provision within the firms, that intensity of training provided, and also we have here it's an objective variable on the education inadequacy, whether the manager views uneducated labor force as a constraint the firm's operations. With respect to the third category of determinants, it is on focuses on market efficiency. Here we are trying to cover the constraints that the firm faces in operating in the market, whether it is like the business licensing, the permits as a constraint to its operations. We also report on the number of competitors a firm faces, and whether the firm reports competition from the informal sector as a constraint to its operations. We also have data on the labor regulations and how they are perceived by the managers of the firms. And finally, we have data on the credit constraints that firms face, and whether these constraints are viewed as like a serious or very severe obstacles to the operation of the firms. With respect to the fourth category of determinants, it's on physical infrastructure. We don't hypothesize that in this category we'll observe any differences between male and female managed firms, but we have to include them based on the literature in our framework. So here we have data on the electricity, telecommunications, and transport as obstacles reported by the managers of the firms. And finally, and this is one of the very, very important categories, which is about the institutional infrastructure barriers that firms face. So whether the managers of the firms report that the political instability in the markets they are operating, or the court system, government regulations, etc., whether they view this or they perceive these obstacles or these issues as severe obstacles to the operation of the firms. And here we have, like, with respect to the corruption, we have whether the firm reports that the government officials like explicitly asked for informal payments or not, and whether this question or these obstacles are perceived by the managers as severe obstacles to the operation of their firms. So basically, we are trying to have like to focus on multiple dimensions when we are talking about the total factor productivity determinants, and the main aim is to try to see if there are gender productivity gaps in our data set, in which of these categories seems to be driving this gap. To give you an overall view of the data set we are dealing with, we started by some descriptive analysis for each of the categories of the total factor productivity determinants. We ran the two sample t-tests for the sample of male managed firms versus the sample of female managed firms. And as you can see here, for the first category, which is innovation, that unlike the common belief that women are risk averse, we find here that women managers or female managed firms in red are more likely to introduce process innovations in their firms. And we found similar results with respect to product innovation. So here significantly, and the asterisks here denote the significance. Here we find that female managed firms are significantly more likely to introduce product innovations in their firms, and the same apply to R&D spending. So actually, women managers are not strictly risk averse, but they can like take some risks. They can go and introduce process or product innovations in their firms. So Moving to the second category of total factor productivity determinants, which is human capital, we found that we didn't find any significant differences between female managed and male managed firms with respect to the educational attainment of their labor force. However, we found that generally male managed firms tend to have like more experienced managers. And like we didn't find significant differences with respect to the other indicators of human capital category. With respect to the third category of total factor productivity determinants, we found that, which is market inefficiency, we found that women managers are significantly more likely to report access to finance as an obstacle to the operations of their firms. And moving to the fourth category of determinants, which is the physical infrastructure category, or the physical infrastructure barriers encountered by firms, we didn't find any significant differences between male managed and female managed firms with respect to physical infrastructure barriers encountered. And finally, with respect to the fifth category of determinants, which is the institutional infrastructure barriers, we found that women managers are more likely to report that informal payment has been requested from them, and also they have lower perceptions about judicial corruption, and this is what we actually expected or hypothesized from while we were starting our study, that probably women managers will be more likely to encounter institutional infrastructure barriers than or compared to male managers or male managed firms. So these are like the findings of the two sample t-tests to give you some descriptive analysis before going to our empirical approach. So the firm level total factor productivity has been provided actually by the enterprise survey team based on or within the general framework of the Cobb-Douglas production function. I'm sure you are all aware of it. And we hypothesize that the gender differences in the behavior or encountered barriers are likely to affect firm heterogeneity and therefore total factor productivity, both directly and indirectly through other total factor productivity determinants. So here we hypothesize that if A here is the unexplained part of our production function, we hypothesize that the gender will be one of the components or one of the factors affecting A, and also D here is the series or like the list of our total factor productivity determinants we have just discussed. So we hypothesize that gender will come and it will affect both the observed factors of production as well as the unobserved or total factor productivity. And since the gender of the manager is the key policy variable we are concerned with in our analysis, and firm level total factor productivity is the outcome variable, we specify the total factor productivity equation as follows. And you will find in the paper like more analysis or more like details on the transformation, but it's pretty straightforward. So here we have the total factor productivity estimates provided by the enterprise survey team of the World Bank, and here we have the gender of the manager of the firm, and D here is a vector of the total factor productivity determinants, and Z is a vector of the firm level and sector level characteristics. So this is like the baseline or the main model we are relying on in this analysis, and to try to see to decompose like the main differences between male and female managed firms with respect to total factor productivity determinants. We will apply the widely used Ohaka blind or Ohaka decomposition. where we'll have like we'll decompose the mean differences in the gap into the explained part, the unexplained part, as well as an interaction between both parts. And finally, we will use the recentered influence functions decomposition, where here we will apply an unconditional quintile regression procedure, providing the decomposition estimates at each specified point of the total productivity distribution. So the hypothesis here, or what we would like to explore using the RIF decomposition, is whether like what could be driving the gap at the, for example, the 10th percentile of the productivity distribution is different from what could be driving the gap at like the 90th or 95th percentile of the productivity distribution. Okay, I'll try to be as quick as possible. So
you should be quicker.
Yeah, okay. So the baseline estimates of the gender differential in total factor productivity show that there is a significant total factor productivity gap in Africa, the whole continent, as well as in North Africa, focusing on North Africa, or with like, it's driven by the region of North Africa, as well as the region of East Africa. Okay, so providing the or summarizing the blinder or Haka decomposition estimates into the, as we were discussing, into the explained part and the unexplained part, we were surprised to find that we didn't find any significant differences in the endowments part or the explained part. Actually, most of the gap was observed based on the unexplained part or the returns to the endowments, and we will come shortly to this. We try to explain the explanatory variables, the total factor productivity determinants. We try to summarize them. So we constructed 5 multiple correspondence analysis indices to reflect each of the categories of total factor productivity determinants. And here, as we are just saying that we didn't find significant differences in the endowments between male managed and female managed firms, but we found that the gap is driven by the returns to the endowments. So, for example, focusing on the institutional infrastructure barriers, we found that women managers and male managers, they tend to face the same amount of institutional barriers, but women managers tend to be more adversely affected by these barriers than male managed firms. So it's not about the level of institutional barriers both groups are encountering, but it's about that some of these barriers tend to be to adversely affect women more than men. And we also reported the results for the like robustness checks for more than 1 or 2 of the total factor productivity estimates reported. So here we are like summarizing all the determinants in 5 indices. Also, to do some robustness checks, we try to report the results not based on indices but based on proxies for each of the categories. So for the innovation, for example, we reported some of the variables that are used to construct the innovation indices. The same applies for the rest of the determinants. And again, we found that the gap is not driven by the endowments between the endowments of female managers versus male managers, but rather by the more adverse effects of the institutional infrastructure barriers here when it comes to the perceptions about the court system, for example. And also here, with respect to the market inefficiency, we found that women managers tend to be more negatively affected by access to finance obstacle than male managers, etc. And finally, with respect to the recentered influence functions decomposition estimates, we reported the results at the 15th percentile of the productivity distribution and the 85th percentile of the distribution. And you can see here that in both, at both points, there is a significant gender productivity gap in terms of there is significant. So the gap is observed actually at all of the productivity. But at the 15th percentile, the gap appears to be driven by both the endowments and the coefficients or the returns to these endowments. However, when we go to the 85th percentile of the distribution, the higher the productivity level, we find that the gap seems to be driven by the returns and not by the endowments of female managers versus male managers. Okay. So to sum up or to conclude, we provide the evidence that gender gaps in total factor productivity performance persist in Africa and specifically in the northern and eastern regions. However, the observed gaps are not driven by the endowments. However, they are driven by the fact that women are more affected by barriers, corruption, and perceptions about it, and market inefficiencies such as the lack of access to finance. And finally, we found that the differences in the endowments of total factor productivity determinants between male and female managers, such as the educational attainment or the entrepreneurial abilities of both groups, or between the respective firms, such as the levels of encountered physical and institutional infrastructure barriers, do not contribute significantly to the gaps. Thank you all for your patience, and all comments are welcome. This is like a preliminary version of the paper, so we welcome all comments and suggestions and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amira, for the nice presentation. Right. So we have already, we have 10 minutes actually. We can have questions and comments from all participants, including our presenters as well. You can raise your hands, or you can type your question into the Q&A section. Right. Oh, okay, Serife. Let me unmute you. No.
I have a question. Can I?
Yes, please.
So, in the data set, you mentioned product innovation, process innovation. Do they separately ask if the firm did some kind of product or process innovation in the data, in the survey?
Yeah, okay, thank you for the question, Serife. Yes, they have like two separate questions, but they are like dummy variables. So whether the firm introduced product innovation over the past 3 years, this is a separate question. And another question, whether the firm introduced process innovation over the past 3 years. They also have a separate question for R&D spending. Like, did you invest in R&D or not, excluding all marketing activities? But if you are interested in the innovation, like in the innovation questions, maybe you will find special modules for some of the countries. So in the comprehensive data set, you don't have like specific data on, for example, the amount of money used to introduce a process or a product innovation. But if you are interested, maybe there are like special modules for specific countries where you can find data even on like the specific amount of investment or spending on R&D or on innovations.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Serife. Yes, any other question? We're open to questions. You can ask questions about all 3 presentations, by the way, because we have a few more minutes, if you like.
Raghi would like the floor.
Okay. Please.
Yes, on the last paper, I was wondering if you included the industry fixed effects, because I assume the female managers and male managers are in very different industries, could be in very different industries.
Thank you very much, Professor Raghi, for your question. We haven't been able to include because we don't have a panel data set, so we don't have like sector fixed effects, but we included the sector dummies and subsector dummies in the analysis. This is the first thing we try to do to account for the fact that maybe, as you were saying, male managers are more likely to be concentrated in, for example, manufacturing versus services. We also try to report the results differently for the manufacturing and services. And again, for the manufacturing, the gap is even wider. So we just included like the subsector dummies, but we didn't have the fixed effects because we didn't have a panel structure of the data set.
Oh, that's why I was asking about the dummies. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Raghi. Thank you, Amira, for your response.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Let me check if we have any other questions. All right.
Murat,
No, yes.
If there are no other questions, maybe I can ask like the participants if they may advise on like the kind of robustness checks that can be done for the Oaxaca decomposition. I think Serife was using the blind Oaxaca decomposition as well. So maybe if there are because I haven't found in the literature strong like robustness checks or sensitivity analysis for this type of methods.
Hello.
Sure.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's also Noor who would like to have the floor.
Oh, okay. But first, I think let's give the floor to Serife for the quick answer to Amira's.
I also, I started using this. I'm, mostly I'm a macro person. I started using these empirical methods very recently. So, in fact, I was planning to ask you some questions about this decomposition.
Okay,
I haven't come up with any, in the papers I read, I haven't come up with any like robustness or sensitivity analysis. So I haven't done any in my paper. Yeah, so that's my answer.
Thank you, Serife. Now, Noor Mograbi has question, I guess.
Yes,
yeah.
My question is on the last paper presentation, and I was wondering if the research has looked at the brand image of companies as part of its performance.
No, excuse me, I didn't get the question. The brand picture or?
The brand image, so basically how it is perceived by the community and consumers, which could be also considered as a company asset.
Yeah, that would be interesting, but unfortunately, as you know, the enterprise survey data is like limited to just like it doesn't provide any info on this. But it just provides the perception of the firms about the obstacles they are facing. But we don't have like data or any even like question or broad question on the brand of or how the brand of the firm itself is perceived. But maybe this can be reflected by some of the indicators we are including, such as the age of the firm. Maybe something like that may kind of reflect the brand image or the market share of the firm, something like that.
Okay. Okay, we have another question from Shahir Zeki. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you for this interesting session. Perhaps just a suggestion for Amira. I think one of the robustness checks, I think it's different methodology, but sometimes it can be used also to answer similar questions, is the fairly nonlinear decomposition, which is a bit similar to the Blender Oaxaca one, but you might use it also in order to check to what extent the results are the same or not. So it's the fairly non-linear decomposition. If you need more references on this, I can send this to you later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shahir. This is very helpful. Maybe we can, like me and Serife, will go and try to apply. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Shahir, for your contribution. Any other question? We are out of time, actually. There is no other questions. I'd like to thank all participants, presenters here, and organizers. Thank you for participating our session. It was nice to meet you guys, Amira, Serife, and Suzanna. Okay, so we're gonna finish now.
And thank you, Murat, for moderating this session. It's been excellent. Thank you all. And you'll be hearing very shortly from Huda, so that you can take on board the discussants' comments and share with us the revised version of the paper, so it can be considered for the ERF working paper series.
Thank you.
And thank you again.
Thank you.
And hope to see you soon in another event, and hopefully in person soon enough.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.